Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I'd like to discuss the most functional tool watches on the market. As in recent years, watches such as the Tudor Black Bay and Oris Diver 65 have been referred to quite regularly as tool watches in various publications. However, I see this as somewhat misleading, as these watches are, though excellently made, designed primarily with aesthetics in mind, whereas I feel a true tool watch should be designed solely to perform the task at hand and be as comfortable and as ergonomic as possible in that purpose. So therefore I would like to address this market in this video, and discuss watches which offer true functionality and resistance to the elements, without any real concern for aesthetics, if that would compromise the functionality of these timepieces. However, before I begin this video, I would like to invite you all to join me on the social media platform Snups at The Watch Guys, a group set up specifically for you, my viewers, to discuss matters of horology with me and indeed other enthusiasts, as well as giving you the ability to ask any questions and suggest video themes and topics. Therefore, I do feel this will allow you to play a greater role in the production of my videos, and will hopefully enhance the viewer experience. And it's certainly been brilliant so far to see so many of you contributing to the group with your own collections and questions, which really does lend to a very unified community of watch lovers. For those who are interested in joining, then the link is down below in the description for you to go and follow. Now, the first two watches in this list are from the Seiko Prospex line, and both of which are also Quartz. But the first of these is the Seiko Kinetic Diver SUN 019, 021 and 023. And this is a model which I don't often talk about, but really does represent Seiko's ability to produce excellent value watches at very reasonable prices, which offer really tremendous quality and value in terms of offering features and functionality, which will be of use to people who are going to use this watch professionally. And this one can see as sort of a baby version of the larger Tuna models in the Seiko Marinemaster line. And this watch is a Quartz model which offers a very versatile set of functions with regards to having a power reserve indicator, a kinetic quartz movement, and as well as a GMT hand, and a very clever colour-coordinated dial and bezel as well as hands on the colourful models, which make it all the more useful for the professional diver amongst you. Now, at 47.5mm in diameter and 15.5mm thick, this watch is on the large side, but due to that very heavily curved Tuna style of case, one loses several millimetres of thickness as the watch sits on the wrist as the lugs drop down. Similarly, the top of the case is heavily curved due to that barrel style, which allows the watch to slip under cuffs relatively easily for a large sports watch like this. But that said, as a real professional tool watch, this watch does serve its purpose as being supremely legible due to that size, and also being able to protect itself against any damage due to those case shrouds around the sides of this polished case, which is rather beautifully sunburst brushed, which I think adds a rather nice effect to this watch as far as its aesthetics go. And similarly, the bezel is very, very well protected by that shroud, which protrudes over the edge, and protects the bezel on two sides, preventing it from being adjusted or damaged by a knock underwater. Now, the bezel insert of this watch is simply anodised aluminium, but that said, when one considers the protection given to this by the edges of the case, and also due to that very thick knurled bezel mounting assembly, this insert is actually protected very well. And similarly, the loom pip is nicely recessed and protected in its position at 12 o'clock, which means there isn't a danger of knocking that off underwater. And this matches the dial very well, which is also very heavily loomed, with very, very clearly luminescent hands and indeed numerals, or rather indices, going around the sides of the dial. And these are also slanted and put on different levels to give the dial a greater visual depth and also make it easier to differentiate between the different functions on that dial. Now, one aspect of this watch which is very different to watches in the rest of the Seiko line, and which actually differentiates this watch as a more resilient option, is that even in some of the Marinemaster models costing well over £1,000, the watches still use hardlex crystals, which I feel are rather useful crystals in terms of offering a rather good shock resistance as well as scratch resistance. But I think most people will prefer a sapphire, which is precisely what this watch offers, for a very reasonable price, where one can usually get hold of this watch for between £350 and £450, making it really exceptional value. But I do feel the movement of this watch, which is incidentally quartz, is one of the most impressive features about this watch with regards to making it a more functional timepiece. Now, the movement in this watch is the Seiko Kinetic 5M89, and this is a quartz movement which is wound by a rotor in the case back, And this means the watch has a 6-month power reserve if one doesn't wear the watch, and it'll wind up quite easily within a day to give the watch that full power reserve, which is very impressive and is far beyond anything seen in the world of mechanical watches with regards to power reserves of 6 months. And also, one beauty of this movement is that using that top pusher, it'll actually show you, using the hands, what the remaining power reserve is, so as the watch won't stop if one leaves it for a while. One can check how much power reserve is still within the watch. And this really does add an element of practicality to a watch, which I think really does offer a timepiece which, as well as being a dive watch, provides a great deal of functions which are useful in any field, really, with regards to travellers, divers, or indeed even pilots with regards to the time zone aspects of this watch. Now, the GMT functions of this movement are presented very, very well by that GMT hand on the dial, which is also loomed along with the other 3 hands visible. And this is quite interesting because on this watch you have a great functionality in terms of being able to change this time zone, or rather the main time zone on the watch, far more easily. And this is because you can change the main hour hand independently from the GMT hand and the minute and second hands. And this allows you to set a separate time zone on the 24-hour hand, and then be able to jump between time zones with your local hands, that's to say the 3 others on the dial, making this watch far more functional for a traveller, and much easier to use for a traveller than a comparable other GMT or mechanical GMT from ETA, for instance, where it's far more fiddly between time zones. And this does show Seiko's attention to detail and care when it comes to making a watch which truly is functional and useful for the user. And of course this is also presented by the colour coordination on certain models, with the minute hand matching the bezel, which allows you to time dives, and then the GMT hand matching its run along the dial, which allows you to read the watch far more quickly at a glance, and give this watch a legibility that simply isn't comparable to anything else on the market, especially at this price point. Now, the next watch on this list is also a Seiko dive watch, and this is the Seiko Marinemaster 1000 meter Quartz, or to say the SBBN 025. And this is a watch which has long interested me as far as the Seiko dive watch series exist, really. And this is a watch which I think could be interchangeable in many people's eyes with watches such as the Sinn UX or the Sinn U1000, around this price point of £1,550. And this is a substantial jump in price from the previous Seiko I've talked about. But I do feel in terms of quality and features, this watch simply couldn't be ignored because it offers a watch which truly does wipe the floor with a great deal of other watches at this price point. And the reason for this is that it offers so much in terms of being a functional dive watch. And I thought that, yes, one could include watches such as the Sinn UX with a 5,000 meter water resistance. But in truth, a human can't exist underwater beyond about 700 meters in the most extreme of cases. So really this watch, which is rated to 1,000 meters but's been tested to well over 3,000, I think really does serve the job very well. Also, this watch features a great many features which are inherent to Seiko divers, and really to this top-tier diver from the brand. Now, the dimensions of this watch are misleading, as is the case with the previous Kinetic diver. And the reason for this is that this watch features a 49mm case, but its lug-to-lug distance is actually close to 47mm, making it sit very proud on the wrist, but nonetheless very comfortably. And the straps on these are extremely supple and very well made straps, with those wrinkles in them and those folds, which mean that when one tightens the watch on land before going underwater, the strap will be very tight on the wrist. And as one descends, the fact that one has this elasticity in the strap means that it can remain tight even when one's wrist shrinks as a result of the pressure, which does show Seiko's attention to detail, especially with a supple strap like this, which is just the right consistency, I suppose, and springiness really in its construction to work perfectly with the weight of this watch. And this watch features a hardened titanium case, as with previous tuners, which allows this 1,000 meter water resistance, with the option for another 2,000 meters on top of that in terms of crush pressure this watch has. Now, surrounding this titanium case, which is incidentally monoblock, which means there's only one piece with regards to the case back, so there's no danger of those rear seals around the case back expiring, since the case back is a single piece, so one has to disassemble the watch from the front to ensure a more reliable water resistance. And surrounding this, there is a ceramic shroud, something which wasn't seen on previous models, but is now the case. and this protects the crown as well as that bezel in a very similar way to the Sun dive as I showed you earlier on. But in this case, it gives you even greater protection due to its shape, which is interchangeable as you can in fact unscrew the shroud and replace it if it's damaged during a dive, for instance. And this watch is fronted by a nicely finished sapphire crystal over those very, very legible hands in that sword style, as well as a pointed minute hand, which is a real departure for the Tuna lineup, but gives this watch extra legibility which wouldn't have been seen on previous models. And of course the dial features a new form of Seiko Lumibright, which allows it to last much, much longer in terms of its nighttime legibility, as well as having that day-date indicator courtesy of its movement, which is a Quartz in-house movement from Seiko, with an end-of-life indicator allowing you to see when the watch is about to run out of battery, which allows you to have that replaced. And the reason why I thought this watch was probably a better option on this list than the larger and substantially more expensive automatic version is that this watch offers a great deal of resistance to shocks and also anti-magnetism, which is reduced by the fact that the other version has a mechanical movement which is more susceptible to knocks and bangs. So as a result, I do feel this watch actually does make a more competent dive watch, as well as having those that day-date indicator, which allows a certain degree of added functionality, especially for the market this watch is designed for, which is to say the professional saturation diving market, where a watch is needed that can tell the date, and if possible the day, because these people spend a great deal of time underwater at depths where there's no light, so it's very useful to be able to compare the day to the calendar. Therefore, I do feel that this watch doesn't fail to hit the mark, as really with all professional Seiko divers, as far as being a watch which truly does fulfill its purpose perfectly, as a watch which isn't designed to be anything other than a true professional tool watch, which serves its purpose and performs as it should do, in the most testing of circumstances, in this case being the depths of the sea, under immense pressure. And so as a result, I do feel this watch certainly deserves a place on this list, though there is rather a price jump between the first prospects I talk about and this model. I feel this model does offer a great deal more in terms of functionality, though I do feel that the SUN, the GMT, offers more in a broader sense for a broader audience, where this is a very specific dive watch for a specific purpose. Now the next watch is a pilot's watch from Damasko, and this is the DC66. And inside this watch is a relatively unremarkable movement, the Veligil 7750, a very reliable movement with its tricompact style of chronograph display, as well as its day-date indicators. But it's in the case and build of this watch that I think this watch excels and provides something which really isn't seen elsewhere in terms of being a really perfect pilot's watch. And the watch is made of ice-hardened nickel-free stainless steel, and this is very prone to magnetism, but is much, much harder than normal steel, at 700 Vickers. And this is slightly softer than the Sinn tegamenting technology on some of their watches, but it's through the whole of the case, meaning the whole watch is much, much more scratch resistant and shock resistant as well in its surface, which means if you bump the watch, the ding or dent won't be as deep or as damaging. Now, to counter the magnetic nature of this case, it has an internal Faraday cage, effectively, with a soft iron core, allowing the watch to be anti-magnetic to 1000 Gauss, which is perfect for really a pilot who has to be affected by large magnetic fields, which one does experience in the air. And the bezel is also rather interesting, because its external sections also feature this hardened steel, but the blackened section, which is either a 12-hour bezel, or indeed a 60-minute one, depending on what you prefer. And it's a bidirectional bezel. But this surface on the insert is 2,500 Vickers in its hardness, which allows it to be very, very abrasion resistant with this Damask layer. And similarly, the bezel is surrounded by a gasket which prevents dust from entering the workings and from causing any damage within. This care in producing a very reliable bezel is also shown in that it runs on ceramic ball bearings, which reduce wear over time and allows the watch to last longer between services with regards to that bezel, which is again an impressive feat with this watch. And considering the watch is £1,830, which is substantially less other than a great deal of luxury timepieces, you really are getting an immense amount of technology. And the list really doesn't even stop here, where one has a sealed bezel loom dot, which allows the lume to be unaffected by external conditions, which is again a feature which makes the watch more reliable for a professional using this timepiece. And again, similarly, the pushers and crown are designed to leave the smallest possible tolerance with the case and are self-lubricated to make them similarly reliable and functional under any circumstances, along with the 100-metre water resistance this timepiece offers. And as a final impressive note with regards to this watch, despite this this wealth of complications and additions to the case and functionality of this watch, this 43.8mm watch is still only 13.5mm thick, making it remarkably slim for a professional pilot's watch of this type with this many features and functionalities. So I think that it really does go without saying that this highly legible timepiece with all these incredible features is exceptional value for £1,830 that this watch costs. And of course it is available on either a strap or the proprietary bracelet that Damasko produce in the same steel, which has adjustable links all the way down the length of the bracelet, to allow the bracelet to be repaired whichever link breaks if it's involved in an accident or damage. So I do think this Damasko offers an incredible level of quality for the price. Now the next watch I'd like to talk about comes from a brand which always comes up in this sort of video, and that's Sinn. And this is the U1000. And this is a watch which, in my best value videos, I wouldn't normally talk about because, though it's a technological marvel and an incredible piece of innovation, I do feel that for the vast majority of people, a lot of features are wasted, I suppose, because you and I, or at least the vast majority of us, simply won't use the features this watch offers. And that's because this watch offers a dive chronograph. And dive chronographs tend to be rather bizarre things because they're either dive watches or chronographs in their purpose. So either one screws down the pushers and goes swimming, or one uses the chronograph on land. But here you have a watch which is designed to do both at the same time, down to incredible depths. Now this watch, with its 44mm case and 18mm thickness, seems very overbearing, but of course one does have to remember that this watch is designed to be used by someone wearing gloves, and it's designed to be worn over a thick wetsuit or even dry suit if one's at these extreme depths, which does allow one to understand the proportions of this watch. And of course the whole watch is fully tegamented submarine steel. And submarine steel is a type of steel used primarily by the German Navy with regards to making their U1000 submersible, which is really at the pinnacle of submarine technology at the moment in terms of the non-nuclear division of submarines. And it's a very, very corrosion-resistant steel, and also one of the most anti-magnetic steels in the world, making this watch anti-magnetic to 1,000 Gauss. And similarly, with this tegamented technology that Sinn add to these watches, is extremely scratch-resistant. It's not quite as shock-resistant in terms of bumps as the Damasko style of nickel-free, ice-hardened stainless steel, but in terms of surface abrasions and scratches, it is superior. And the primary function, I suppose, of this watch, though, is the dive chronograph. So one has the unidirectional captive bezel, which is designed to be particularly sturdy, on the front of the watch with a very clear lume marking to match those hands and dial markings. But also, one has these chronograph pushers which are certified to the full 1,000 metres this watch is depth rated to, although this watch can go to 1,250 due to its overpressure limit, as certified by the ISO criteria and certifications. And the movement is also modified, as it's a modified Visual 7750 with the date, but also with a 60-minute counter rather than the normal 30-minute, as this is much more legible for a diver under pressing circumstances. This watch also features Sinn's AR dehumidifying technology, which means that it's filled with inert gas, which means that less moisture will be present inside the watch to damage the components. And similarly, there's a copper sulfate capsule in the side of the watch, which absorbs moisture, and all those who remember chemistry from school will know that copper sulfate goes blue when it absorbs water and becomes hydrated. And this shows you what level of absorption it's taken in, which allows you to know when to replace the capsule in servicing. Which is a feature which is very interesting and I think adds to the value of this watch as a piece which really will last a lifetime and will protect itself against the elements. And this does make this watch actually very good value for between £3,470 and £3,920, depending on whether you go for a normal steel version, the bracelet option, or indeed whether you go for the full PVD model. And a blue dial version is also available. But this does make this watch actually pretty impeccable value when one considers a great deal of other chronographs in the diving segment are on the market, and I do feel this watch does offer more, and I would actually call the best diving chronograph on the market at the present time. Now, the final watch on this list is one which I think is rather unexpected in this list, for the simple reason that it is presented as a luxury product. And this is the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean, and this is the new version, the Co-Axial Master Chronometer 3rd generation watch. And this watch comes in two sizes, really. It comes in a 43.5mm version and a 39.5mm version. And there's been a lot of discussion as to the differences between these two watches. And primarily they share the same specifications, though I will point out the differences when I talk about the movement, because that's where the main difference lies. And the watch features a very beautiful level of finishing, although that isn't really terribly relevant to this video due to the fact that this video is very much about the functionality of these watches. But this is a very professional saturation dive watch, with a very respectable 600-metre depth rating on the watch and case, as well as having extremely legible hands and a very legible and very resistant ceramic bezel. And in this case, one has hands which are typically Omega in their broad arrow style, to make the hands all the more legible against the markers, where in a great deal of watches it can be difficult at certain angles to differentiate between the markers and the hands, for differentiating between small gaps on the dial. But here there really is no danger of this with these very clear hands, which are also even more legible due to the fact that they glow different colours, and the colour of the lume in the minute hand is coordinated with the bezel to allow you to time these events and dive times much more easily. The watch also features a helium escape valve, which is a fairly crucial feature on a professional dive watch in most people's eyes. Though there are many watches these days that can resist the ingress of helium, such as the Sinn I showed you and also the Seiko Tuna, it is good to have one of these, considering the fact that if the seals do fail with regards to allowing a certain amount of helium into the watch will be destroyed upon decompression in the case of a saturation diver. So there is an element of functionality here that Omega have incorporated into this watch. Though I must say the primary impressive aspects of this watch come in the form of the movement housed within that case. And this movement is a twofold situation. There are two movements available. In the 39.5mm version, we have the 8800 caliber, and then the 8900 caliber in the larger 43.5mm version. And the differences between these two movements are very subtle, in that the 8800 has a 55-hour power reserve, whilst the larger 8900 has a 60-hour power reserve. And similarly, the bearings on the rotor are slightly different, as well as the fact that the 8900 caliber has the wonderful addition of a jumping hour hand from the crown, which is a very useful feature as seen on that first Seiko I talked about, where one can jump the hour hand backwards and forwards independently of the other hands, allowing you to change time zones without losing any timekeeping accuracy by stopping the second hand, which is a real godsend, I think, for those who are travelling with this watch, as it does make adjusting the time much quicker and also much easier in terms of making mistakes or setting the wrong time, and especially with flights this can be a real inconvenience. However, the reason why I'd like to talk about these movements in this video, and indeed this dive watch as a whole, is that it offers a watch which is so complete in terms of its ability to withstand the elements. I can't really think of a better watch in terms of an all-rounder, in that the movement in this watch is, to all intents and purposes, completely anti-magnetic, due to its silicon balance spring and a general lack of reactivity to demagnetism, which is very impressive considering Omega's innovations with this movement, and especially at this price point of £4,500 or so. You really are getting a great deal of watch with this 15,000 Gauss anti-magnetism. Similarly, the Co-Axial escapement makes this watch extremely reliable as far as service life is, in that this watch will last over 10 years between services, which is extremely impressive and certainly does show the innovation of Mr. Daniels when he invented this escapement, which reduces friction so immensely that it is able to extend service intervals and remove the need of lubricants entirely in the escapement. This means that in a sense this watch is really the ultimate watch in terms of being a daily tool, in that it offers you the ability to have a watch which is beautifully made, but does offer very true and very clear and obvious functionality, with a movement which, though decorated, is very much a no-nonsense piece, which is designed to withstand the elements that one would come across, not just diving in the most simple, one-faceted sense of this watch, but during the daily life of commuting, travel, and also in terms of the proximity we live to technology these days, with large magnetic fields. And of course, the build quality of this watch is beautiful, with the wonderful zirconium dioxide dial, and ceramic bezel. But I must say this watch really has impressed me and has shown, I think, that a luxury product can be a tool watch as well. Anyway though, I'll conclude this video here, but thank you very much for watching, and please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to enjoy more content here in future. Also, do leave your comments down below as to what you think of this theme as a whole, and also as to your thoughts of the watches I included, and if there are any ones which you would have included which I haven't. So thank you very much for watching. This is Sam on the Watch Guy, over and out.